We're going to get started though this morning with that dangerous heat wave many of you across the country are dealing with.
With sweltering temperatures putting lives at risk, the White House could reportedly make a big announcement soon. According to the Washington Post, President Biden could declare a climate emergency as soon as this week. The move would come after two stinging defeats for the White House. Citing inflation concerns, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin said he would block President Biden's climate legislation, which includes tax incentives for wind and solar power and electric vehicles. The other blow, the Supreme Court's decision limiting the EPA's ability to regulate carbon emissions from power plants. And the extreme temperatures we're seeing through a large portion of the country are putting the issue of climate change front and center. Overseas, historic heat and wildfires are also having a major impact in Europe. The heat wave there is blamed for more than 1,000 deaths in Spain and Portugal. And in the UK, the Health Security Agency announced its first level 4 heat warning, which is the highest possible level. Officials there are calling the brutal temperatures a national emergency. From the U.S. to Europe, we have full coverage this morning with NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman and foreign correspondent Claudia Lavanga in Rome. We're going to begin, though, with NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. So, Mike, we want to start with that Washington Post report that says President Biden is considering declaring a national climate emergency, and it could happen as soon as this week. That's coming from 3 people familiar with the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss private deliberations. NBC News has reached out to the White House. We haven't heard back yet. So, Mike, what options would declaring a national climate emergency give the president when it comes to fighting global warming and climate change?
Well, first, Joe, let's just be clear. The president has made it clear as they issued a statement on Friday saying that climate action remains an urgent priority. And as the president put it, if the Senate refuses to act, he will take strong executive action. A White House official just got to get back to me a moment ago, in fact, Joe, saying that we are still considering all options and no final decision has been made. But what are those options? This official is pointing out that the president has already taken a number of executive actions to try to deal with climate change, including invoking the Defense Production Act just last month to try to boost the solar manufacturing industry. According to a report from the Center for Biological Diversity, which is urging the president to take this more urgent action, he could also consider actions like invoking the Defense Production Act again, suspending offshore drilling, and halting crude oil exports. Now, of course, as the White House is indicating, this is an option that they have been long considering. There was always a certain amount of pessimism about these talks that Senator Schumer was engaged in with Senator Manchin, and so they're ready for this moment, but now they're kind of doing the final vetting of these options.
Mike, one of the big challenges is last month the Supreme Court severely restricted the EPA's authority to regulate carbon emissions. So how is the White House trying to work around that ruling and to avoid further court challenges down the road?
Yeah, this decision last month was seen by a lot of climate activists as a real gut punch. The Obama administration had based so much of its climate policy on using executive authorities, and that was what was struck down by the Supreme Court, specifically the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. Now, White House officials telling me this morning that they believe that court ruling was actually rather narrow, that this was one narrow ruling on one specific narrow authority. And they believe that there are still authorities within other pieces of legislation that the president can employ at this point, a range of authorities that a range of agencies, even beyond the Environmental Protection Agency, could employ. And so they believe they're on strong legal footing. But when you talk about invoking a climate emergency, I think that's an effort by the White House to give whatever actions the president were to take even more legal authority. We see this in potential action on climate, and we've also been talking about this as a possible public health emergency the administration is considering declaring in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision on abortion. That's where the White House is really in emergency mode on a number of fronts, Joe.
I mean, let's be clear, Mike, any executive order from the president on climate is likely going to end up in court. So Congress is still, ideally for the president, the best way to make a lasting change. But we know Senator Joe Manchin, he's come out against President Biden's climate and tax plan now. So is there any hope at all for more negotiations in the Senate, or is it pretty much the president having to go it alone here?
Joe, the vice president was actually out giving a speech yesterday, speaking to the NAACP, and as it relates to a number of Biden administration priorities, whether it be voting rights, taking action on abortion, or other policies, she said, we need 2 more votes in the Senate. The White House, as I indicated, was always skeptical that Senator Manchin was going to come around. You heard the president say this on Friday. He was asked if Senator Manchin had been negotiating in good faith. He says, I wasn't negotiating with Senator Manchin, so I couldn't speak to it. There was a view, even in Democratic leadership, that Senator Schumer was perhaps a little bit too optimistic that Manchin could be brought on board with a robust effort to revive the Build Back Better agenda. And so now what the president is calling on Congress to do, the Senate specifically, is to take the few options that Senator Manchin is willing to go ahead with and try to pass that. But really, any further action on climate specifically is going to depend on the midterm elections this fall.
All right, Mike Memoli, thanks for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
Now, for more on the devastating impact of this heat wave overseas, we're joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga in Rome. Claudio, good morning. So let's start in Great Britain, which has seen, even salt trucks spraying sand on roads to stop them from melting. Geographically, this really is something, because this is an area whose southernmost point is on the same latitude as Winnipeg, Canada. They're not equipped to deal with this dangerous heat. What's it been like there? Are people staying safe?
Hey, Savannah. Well, actually, we learned in the last few minutes that the temperature in the UK has now reached 102.3 Fahrenheit. Well, that makes today the hottest day in history in the UK. Pretty hot, especially for a country that usually is more used to temperatures in the range of the 60s or 70s at this time of the year. Of course, the UK is not prepared for this kind of heat. We've seen it yesterday when the temperature there reached only quote, quote, 99, still very hot for the UK, and we've seen the consequences of that. In one of the airports, one of the 4 airports in London, Luton Airport, the tarmac lifted so that some of the planes had to be diverted to other airports, and that is one of the many effects. A picture, perhaps, that represents what happens in London or in England when there is this kind of heat is a picture that struck me yesterday is about a royal guard. I don't know whether you can see that. It's a royal guard in his typical uniform, wearing a bearskin hat. Every tourist that has been in London at Buckingham Palace will remember that, and that's very, very hot, of course. And those guards, if you've been there, they just do not flinch on anything. Tourists trying to poke them and trying to make them laugh and taking selfies, they just do not move. But this poor guy, it must have been so hot that a policeman took pity on him and started giving him some water. And this was yesterday. Today, the temperature is even hotter, 102.3. So imagine how difficult it will be for the British, for the Brits in the UK to cope with this kind of weather, Savannah.
Absolutely. 100 degrees in that outfit doesn't seem safe. Claudio, now let's talk through fires. First in southwest France, they've already burned more than 27,000 acres and forced thousands from their homes, but also Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, all dealing with wildfires. How's it going with efforts to contain them?
Well, there have been widespread forest fires all across the southern Europe, Portugal, Spain, Italy, but now the worst one that we've seen is one that is affecting the area of Gironde, which is in southwest France. That has been raging for a number of days now. It has employed more than 2,000 firefighters trying to battle it. 4 days now, it forced the evacuation of 32,000 people. It has been called by French authorities the fire of the century. Now, yesterday, we saw another piece of video from Spain, which has also been affected by forest fires. Very impressive, scary stuff. We've seen a train that was traveling through 2 fires on the left and the right, essentially was driving through a forest fire. Luckily, all the passengers are safe, and the train in the end reached its final destination. Savannah.
All right, now also a study published in June in the journal Environmental Research Climate concluded it's highly probable that climate change is making these deadly heat waves worse. How are European leaders specifically responding to the climate crisis?
Well, all experts, of course, agree that these series of heat waves are the consequence of climate change. But now European leaders, as you mentioned, started to admit that too, started to say that too. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, yesterday said that climate change kills. It kills people, it kills the ecosystem, it kills biodiversity. So leaders now, not only experts, are starting to admit and say that this is the consequence of climate change. Savannah?
All right, Claudio Luvanga from a very warm Rome for us. Stay cool, Claudio. Thank you.
For more on the dangerous heat here at home, let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Yeah, Michelle Grossman joins us. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. And we are looking at that relentless heat continuing, and we're going to see it continue. So no relief. We're looking at some relief in Europe. I'll show you that in just a minute. That's going to start tomorrow. But taking a look at records yesterday, we had a really hot day once again. Widespread triple digits across the area. 101 in Oklahoma City, 104 in Lubbock, 107 in San Angelo. It was 109 degrees in Dallas. And we're going to have another hot day in the central and southern plains, the west too. 194 million people with highs above 90 degrees. And we're looking at 40 million, with highs above 100. That's a lot, and that's very widespread. It's dangerous. We're not getting the relief at night. We had temperatures near 100 degrees in Phoenix overnight. We're looking at temperatures in the 90s in Dallas, so we're not getting that relief once that sun does set either. 89 million people impacted by a heat alert today from the west all the way to the central and southern plains. Okay. And notice the northeast, New York City. We are looking at a heat advisory starting tomorrow. That includes Boston. That includes Philadelphia, because we are looking at a stretch of 90s across the area. There's that relentless heat for today. 109 once again in Dallas. It's going to feel like 110. It'll feel like 107 in Memphis, 95. It's going to feel like 98 degrees in Minneapolis. So close to the century mark there will be the heat index. And then we're going to start those 90s in Philadelphia, 91. And we're going to see that lasting at least through the weekend. We get a little bit of a break starting next week. Tomorrow we're looking at temperatures into the mid-90s in New York City. So the heat does go on. We're looking at temperatures into the triple digits still. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, St. Louis, same story. New York City, mid-90s Thursday, 92 on Friday, 94 on Saturday. You factor in the humidity, it's going to feel warmer than that. Then let's talk about that historic heat wave that Claudio was talking about. Notice London, 100 degrees today. We're looking at triple digits. We broke a record there of 102, and we're looking at 80 degrees tomorrow. So some relief in Paris, 77. That's going to feel good after this historic heat wave. But notice Madrid, also Rome, we're looking at temperatures staying put in the upper 90s and triple digits. Now, back home, we have some summer storms. We have lots of heat, lots of humidity that's fueling those storms. So storms along the border of Canada and the northern tier of the nation into Minnesota. We're looking at some storms in the southeast as well. So some heavy rain in parts of New England, but that's moving out. We're going to see a second system moving in. First, though, the bullseye for severe weather today will be in the Midwest. We're looking at a cold front that's moving through the Midwest. That's going to bring the chance of some gusty winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Could see some hail and even the chance of a tornado. And then, you guys, this cold front moves off to the Great Lakes tomorrow. So more severe weather tomorrow. Plenty of fuel. We have the trigger of the storms, and we're going to talk more about that heat in just a bit.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Now, today is day 2 of jury selection in the trial of former top Trump advisor Steve Bannon.
Bannon faces criminal contempt of Congress charges after refusing to comply with a subpoena issued by the January 6th committee. In a stunning reversal more than a week ago, he offered to testify in a live public hearing, but committee members have said that's not likely to happen. For more on that, we are joined now by NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, good morning. So we know this is an unusual case, to put it mildly. What are you going to be watching out for as this unfolds?
Unusual is the right word. This is a crime that is very rarely prosecuted. Most of the time, contempt is civil. In other words, the judge may throw you in jail, but it's technically not a crime. It's just to get you to comply with a court order or a court directive. This is criminal contempt. It's different. It's punishing what Steve Bannon already allegedly did in the past. So when he offered to testify or come to the committee last week or the week before, that wouldn't have remedied it no more than when you rob a bank. Offering to give back the money negates the crime. So this is a very interesting case, rarely prosecuted. Look for Steve Bannon's defense team to try and make this about a political prosecution to the jury, that this isn't really a crime. This is more about politics, and he's a sort of political prisoner, for lack of a better word.
Now, Bannon's defense team has also questioned whether he's going to be able to get a fair trial because of the jury pool, how that process is going to work, just because everybody knows about January 6th. It's obviously something we're all talking about a lot. There's a House committee investigating it. What do you make of that?
I've had this issue in my own high-profile trials, and what happens is the test is not whether or not a juror has heard about the case or heard about your defendant. Sometimes in a case like this, Every juror has heard of Steve Bannon. Everyone who is in this jury pool knows about January 6th. So instead, the test is whether, given what you know about the case, can you set aside any biases you may have and judge this defendant fairly and impartially? And then it's up to the defense counsel and the prosecutors to argue about whether or not this juror really is too biased, or they can really set those things aside. But bottom line is, it will be difficult to seat a jury, more difficult than in your run-of-the-mill case involving a defendant that nobody's ever heard of.
Bannon, of course, remains defiant during this. His attorney has kind of raised some questions. I think my favorite quote from his attorney is, "What's the point of going to trial here if there are no defenses? How do you defend him in this situation?"
And you know what the judge reportedly said after that? The judge said, and I believe I'm quoting, "Agreed." I mean, that's amazing. Obviously, it's out of the earshot of the jury. That would be incredibly prejudicial. And look, when you're going back and forth in oral argument, things are said. It seems a little crazy to think that a judge said that. But look, you say stuff in oral argument, and the judge does too. The judge revealed that the judge has an idea about this case now that all these defenses are gone, but it will be up to the jury. Look, as a defense attorney, I'm biased. It feels like the world's against you. And if I'm Bannon's defense counsel, I'm feeling like, look, this judge has tied our hands. I understand the sentiment, but, you know, the judge has to eliminate the defenses that the judge thinks are not legally viable. And that's what the judge did.
All right, we're going to see what happens. Will be interesting.
Yeah, it certainly will be. Danny Savelis, as always, thanks for joining us. Now, as the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol prepares for Thursday's primetime hearing, two more Trump White House officials will take center stage. NBC News has learned that Matthew Pottinger and Sarah Matthews will testify during Thursday's hearing. Pottinger was a member of the National Security Council, while Matthews worked as deputy press secretary. Both resigned in the days following the attack on the Capitol. Joining us now for more is NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong. Scott, good morning. Thanks for joining us. So in past hearings, we've heard compelling testimony from former White House officials, people who were in the inside as this unfolded. On Thursday, the committee is expected to focus on what the president did or didn't do during the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Obviously important there for it to be people close to the president on that day. But what do we know about what Pottinger and Matthews did in the Trump White House, and why would their testimony be helpful for that particular point they're trying to make?
Well, these were two individuals who worked in the West Wing, who were, intimately familiar with the surroundings, with the people, and certainly with President Trump. And these two people, Pottinger and Matthews, resigned in the very wake of the attack itself. In the case of Sarah Matthews, she tweeted on the one-year anniversary that January 6th was nothing more than a coup attempt, and that former President Trump failed to meet the moment. For Pottinger, he has described in previous closed-door testimony to the committee that he decided to resign the moment at 2:24 p.m. on January 6th. That was the moment when President Trump sent out the tweet targeting his own Vice President Mike Pence, saying that he didn't have the courage, end quote, to carry out the overturning of the election. So these are people that wrestled with January 6th, morally, personally, and ultimately decided that what they had seen and experienced was simply too much for them to continue to serve under President Trump.
Now, Scott, the House panel is expecting those allegedly erased text messages from the Secret Service by the end of the day. Obviously, this was a headline that caught a lot of attention. How important could those messages be to the committee's investigation?
They could be very important. And the reason is because they could confirm key elements of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before the committee last month. If you remember, she had testified that what she had overheard from some top White House officials and security officials was that President Trump had wanted, very passionately to join some of his supporters on January 6th in the march on the Capitol. In so much so, in fact, that he, according to Cassidy Hutchinson and what she had heard, got into a physical altercation with one of his top security folks in the presidential SUV, at one point trying to grab the steering wheel of the vehicle. And so those text messages could confirm a lot of that and corroborate a lot of that information, as well as reveal a lot more. And And Chairman Benny Thompson and other members told us yesterday that they still do anticipate to receive those text messages by close of business today, which is the deadline that they have given the Secret Service to turn those over.
And Scott, before I let you go, I want to switch gears here quickly. We got word yesterday that Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska, will address Congress tomorrow on Capitol Hill. How significant is that speech? And quickly tell us what she's been doing during her D.C. trip.
Yeah, just yesterday evening, she met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. She is here at the invitation of First Lady Joe Biden, and that's because they formed a relationship. Joe Biden went to Kyiv herself in May and met with the Ukrainian First Lady. And so there's a relationship there. She's going to be speaking to the United States Congress in the same auditorium where her husband in March addressed the Congress through a virtual address. And I think what the message is going to be from her is that, look, don't forget about Ukraine. Don't forget about her people. I know there's all these other issues that are affecting America, inflation, high gas prices, but there is real suffering happening in Ukraine, and in the Congress and the United States should not forget Ukraine at this moment.
All right, Scott Wong, thank you so much.
In Uvalde, Texas, calls for accountability are growing louder nearly 2 months after that deadly mass school shooting. Survivors, families, and community members all spoke out at a school board meeting last night, criticizing school officials for what they call failures and lack of leadership.
You don't have an answer. Don't have an answer? You don't have an answer for these families?
NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas joins us now from Uvalde. So, Guad, that school board meeting lasted more than 3 hours, and it came one day after a preliminary report by a Texas House committee found systemic failures and egregiously poor decision-making by law enforcement in the school district. So what came out of the meeting last night?
Joe, this was a very difficult meeting for school administrators. Now, this was an opportunity for members of the public to step up to a microphone and have an unlimited amount of time to ask questions in front of the school board. That was the intention. The superintendent did say he apologized for not making that meeting available before, saying they should have done it earlier. Now, the parents that came and spoke to the microphone, as you said, over 3 hours, were upset, of course, this right after that report was released over the weekend. And frankly, Joe, it felt like two different opposing sides. On one side, you had the members of the school board trying to answer questions, and on the other side, the members of the public not only speaking angrily or upset on the microphone, but also yelling from across the auditorium. Here's a part of that conversation, not only from parents, but also from some students.
I don't want to go to your guys' school if they don't have protection.
These are the things that keep me up at night. And I wonder, have you thought of these things? Have they crossed your mind? So I ask you, what are you going to do about your failures? Are you going to take responsibility? Are you going to make this right?
And that was a mother talking about the feeling of sending her kids back to school. Some of the parents that I spoke to after the meeting ended said they do not feel safe sending their kids back to school here when the summer ends, Joe.
In the video, Guad, we can see signs that mention the police chief there, Pete Arredondo. The community has been calling for the school district to fire him. Has the district responded to that?
Joe, the most heated moments of the conversation last night is when they talked about Pete Arredondo. Now, we know that the initial reports had said he was the commander of all the officers that responded. Since then, we've learned more details. Now, the conversation last night was basically parents and members of the community asking why he was still employed, asking what is going to happen to Pete Arredondo, who continues to be on administrative leave. Now, the school superintendent did say they will consider the findings of that report that was released over the weekends and meet in a closed session to decide the future of Pete Arredondo. Yet the public wasn't satisfied, and they kept asking the same question. Here's one of the individuals that was talking about Pete Arredondo.
I'll tell you this, if he's not fired by noon tomorrow, then I want your resignation and every single one of you board members, because y'all do not give a damn about our children or us. stand with us or against us, because we ain't going nowhere.
And you can hear the reaction from most of the people who were in that auditorium. Now, Pete Arredondo has said he did not consider himself the incident commander. He also says he did not ask the officers not to breach the classrooms.
Understandably, a lot of emotions at that meeting last night. Guad, thank you so much.
In Indiana, a 22-year-old armed bystander is being credited for stopping the gunman in a mass shooting at a shopping mall on Sunday. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has more on the quick action that likely saved lives.
Authorities here in Greenwood releasing new details in this investigation and hailing that 22-year-old civilian as a hero, also crediting him with saving lives. Another American mass shooting with a rare twist after authorities near Indianapolis say a Good Samaritan armed with a handgun shot the gunman and ended the chaos.
Many more people would have died last night if not for a responsible armed citizen.
Investigators naming that Good Samaritan as Elijah Dickin, a 22-year-old Indiana man who's declining to speak publicly. They say the Good Samaritan was legally carrying a handgun at the Greenwood Park Mall with his girlfriend when around 5 p.m. Sunday, the 20-year-old gunman entered the food court, armed with 2 semi-automatic rifles and a handgun. Investigators say he first went to the restroom and stayed for an hour, stashing his phone in a toilet, then emerged and started firing.
We heard loud gunshots.
They say the gunman killed 3, including Victor Gomez, and injured 2, among them a 12-year-old girl.
Seen somebody laying on the ground, and I just grabbed my kids and we ran.
Authorities say the armed bystander confronted and killed the shooter immediately, a rare outcome amid this kind of carnage. Researchers who study active shooter events tracked 464 attacks between 2000 and 2021. In 73 cases, a bystander stopped the shooter, mostly by subduing them physically. The number of times a bystander shot the shooter, 24.
This young man acted within seconds, stopping the shooter and saving countless lives.
No word on the suspected gunman's motive in this shooting, but authorities said family told them he'd recently left his job and been evicted. His family declined to comment. Back to you.
All right, Maggie Vespa, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.